we're dealing with a public safety issue here. There is no question that immunizations have been effective in eliminating things like smallpox, which were devastating and lethal diseases. So you have to be able to separate out our rights versus the rights of the society in which we live, because we're all in this thing together.
Dr. Ben Carson appearing on this program last week talking about the vaccine debate and whether parents have the right to refuse those inoculations for their children. But that debate is only part of the story, according to our next guest. Joining us now, former INS officer Michael Cutler, who Skypes in from New York. Jack Bergman stays with us in his role as co-host this morning from Newsmax Washington. Michael, you have written a column saying the conversation really shouldn't be focused on parental permission for vaccinations entirely. Where else should we be looking, Michael?
Well, at anybody who might be wandering around our streets who has not been vaccinated, perhaps harboring the measles or other contagious diseases, and we're talking now about immigrants, whether they're here legally or illegally. By the way, good morning, and I appreciate you having me on, JD. Here's the point. Non-immigrant visitors, tourists, apparently are not required to be vaccinated for the measles virus. We saw the outbreak of the enterovirus just on the heels of that massive influx of undocumented and unaccompanied minors, as they call them. I'm not saying that they necessarily are the cause of the epidemic, but why aren't we willing to even have that conversation? The only people who have an entitlement to be present in the United States are U.S. citizens, and yet we're treating people from around the world, no matter how they get here, according to the woman who would be the next Attorney General. Doesn't matter how they come here, as long as they're here, all's right with the world. This is crazy stuff.
Maybe let me get this straight. Obama, this administration will require, it will require Americans to have certain vaccinations, but it will not require undocumented folks new into this country, illegals. Is that what's going on?
Well, apparently so. And in fact, if you come on a tourist visa or under the visa waiver program, measles vaccine is not a requirement, according to information available on the website right now. So why in the world aren't we making it a requirement? There's certain standards that must be met. Most people don't seem to understand that Ellis Island was a quarantine station. And if you go to the categories of aliens to be kept out of the United States, it has nothing whatsoever to do with race, religion, or ethnicity, but it starts out with aliens with dangerous communicable diseases, aliens severely mentally ill and violent, sex offenders, convicted felons, fugitives from justice, spies, terrorists, human rights violators. So why in the world are we acting as a nation that anybody who comes here from another country is somehow exempt from the laws that are supposed to govern our nation and protect us?
And speaking of those laws, in terms of public health, as it stands now, each state has its own rules and regulations about vaccines. We can take a look at the map. There are some states that have exempted immunizations. And I guess the broader question in the 2 minutes that remain in this segment, Michael, should this now be a federal issue, or are we able to split the difference, if you will, between residents of a state who are citizens and those who immigrate to the United States or come here on visas?
Well, before we require it as an ironclad, you got to do it for Americans, we should be requiring it of folks who want to visit the United States, because those standards of admission are established by the federal government, not by the states. So why isn't the federal government stepping up and saying, okay, if you want to come to America, we require a measles vaccine? I suspect a part of it is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that's thrilled to have people come here no matter how they get here, because they represent tourism, they represent students in the universities, and they represent cheap labor.
Let me ask you this, we only have about 20 seconds left. What can Congress do? Is there any legislative solution here? Is there anywhere money can be put into the budget, a regulatory requirement can be put into the budget, or money can be held back? Is there anything we Republicans can do, or are we helpless?
Well, with this administration, this lawlessness, it's hard to say, but they've got to come up with a solution to hold this administration accountable. American lives are on the line. It's as simple as that.
And speaking of American lives, this is not overwrought with the news and the admission that there could very well be sleeper states here in the United States, sleeper cells associated with ISIS. Gentlemen, you stay put because we want to have that very important discussion when we come back on the other side of the break. This is news and informed opinion important to all of us. So we trust you will stay with us as well as we continue the conversation with Michael Cutler, and Jack Berkman remains with us as well from Newsmax Washington. That and more is ahead right after this on America's Forum.
There are ISIS cells in the U.S.
There are individuals that have been in communication with groups like ISIL who have a desire to conduct an attack, yes.
Michael Steinbeck, Assistant Director for the FBI's Counterterrorism Division, saying terror sleeper cells could be in our nation right now. Let's continue our conversation. Conservative strategist Jack Berkman joins us from Newsmax Washington, and via Skype from New York, former INS officer Michael Cutler. Michael, the whole notion of sleeper cells here, can this be traced back to our porous borders?
Oh, absolutely. And not just the U.S.-Mexican border. You know, if you look at all the terrorists who've attacked our country since '93, Cansey at the CIA shot 2 CIA officers to death, wounded 3 others. First attack at the Trade Center '93, 9/11, the Tsarnaevs. They all came here. They didn't run the border. They employed visa fraud, and then they used immigration fraud as an abetting tactic. Not just my opinion. That was the findings of the 9/11 Commission, to which I provided testimony, by the way.
Let me ask you this. Why is it that we Republicans can't win on this issue? Why is it that we can't seem to make the general public aware? We're losing politically, it seems to me, on the issue of we can't build a fence on the southwest border. We really can't control our borders anywhere. Why are we losing politically on this issue? And what can we do to improve that?
Well, I think it's both parties. This isn't about left or right. This is about right or wrong. And so this is about the U.S. Chamber of Commerce pumping mega bucks into campaigns to push for open borders, expanding the visa waiver program. On 9/11, we had 26 visa waiver countries. We're up to 38. Chile became number 38 a year ago, March. You have other folks that are pushing for this. And it's about cowardice as far as I'm concerned. If people stood up, politicians stood up and said, listen, this is not an anti-immigrant position. The immigration laws that tell us who to keep out and kick out, the people who pose a threat, also allow us to admit more than a million lawful immigrants. Pro-enforcement is a pro-immigrant position, but the folks in Washington and elsewhere don't have the guts to say something as fundamental as that. They got to, grow some hair on their chest or something.
Well, speaking of folks in charge in Washington, Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson has this update on tracking the threats from ISIS in this nation. Let's take a listen.
The FBI and the Department of Homeland Security do a pretty good job of tracking the travel of individuals of suspicion of investigating potential acts of terror or material support to terrorism. Just this past Friday, there were arrests of 5 individuals who were providing material support allegedly to ISIL.
So the secretary says 5 have been arrested, 5 being the operative term from the Congress, Michael, when it comes to the Secure Border Act, asking for 5 years to get operational control of our borders. Why the lack of urgency on the part of both the executive and legislative branches?
Well, because, again, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce wants the flow of these folks to come here. We've known about these issues going back to '93. I did my first hearing on visa fraud and immigration fraud May 20th, '97, 4.5 years before 9/11. And by the way, the FBI just posted on their most wanted terrorist list a naturalized United States citizen from Somalia. And this individual had been a cab driver in D.C. So right on the wanted poster, it says they're concerned that because he had a license and drove a cab in Washington, he's intimately familiar with the infrastructure. We naturalized him. There is no integrity to the process, and there's no integrity to our politicians. There's a lack of integrity on both sides of that equation.
Maybe, and I think we have just 20 or 30 seconds remaining here, maybe what we need to do is to begin a real concerted, systematic, and deliberate campaign to politically attack the Chamber of Commerce. Maybe we have to vilify them, demonize them in the eyes of the public, and we have to pull Republican members away from them. Maybe that's the only way to do this, because it seems in all of these conversations, they are the evil. They somehow become the center of every conversation we've had this morning about immigration.
Only 15 seconds remain, Michael.
Well, it's the Chamber, the Immigration Lawyers Association, Zuckerberg and Gates down in Silicon Valley want the cheap programmers. We've got to put American lives and American livelihoods first on that list. It's up to the American people to stand up and make those demands, and I hope the folks listening do just that. And I thank you for covering this topic, because no one else is